I rise today at third reading on Bill S-209, an act to restrict young people's access to online pornography. This is the third time I've sought to pass this bill to protect children. I am persistent on their behalf and on behalf of Canadian parents who have been telling me for 5 years that this law is necessary. The committee's examination of the bill was exhaustive. We heard from 33 witnesses from here and abroad, from Europe and Australia, who came to speak about their various laws protecting children and to confirm how dangerous it is to expose minors to pornography with studies to support them.
Canadian Centre for Child Protection provided the committee with stark and explicit examples of the content children are exposed to online. To quote her, there is evidence that exposure to pornography can cause harm to children, particularly when that material is violent, degrading, or illegal. In our experience, adult online pornography is often extreme, with more frequent depictions of violence, sadism, bondage, and torture, and it often depicts individuals who are made to appear younger. For example, and for clarity, in one video that is readily available, the following occurs. And then I continue and I quote Noni Klassen. A naked female young adult is shown on her hands and knees while a male is penetrating her from behind. In the background, there are at least 6 other naked men visible, all of whom appear to be engaged in masturbation. The men take turns engaging in anal intercourse with the female, one after the other. The video includes close-ups of the female face, where she is shown smiling at the camera. Towards the end of the video, the female is shown on her knees, performing fellatio on each of the men in succession, who are lined up around the room. Question for you, my colleague. Do you really want your children or grandchildren to be exposed to those scenes? Pour sa part, la réputée psychologue...
For her part, renowned French clinical psychologist Maria Hernandez Mora Ruiz de Castillo, who treats young adults addicted to pornography, concluded before the committee that early exposure to pornography is literally a form of sexual assault. And I quote, "A child exposed to pornography suffers a traumatic intrusion into an innocent psychological world. These images are not comprehensible, nor can they be integrated into the child's psyche. They act as a traumatic shock, generating confusion, shame, anxiety, even dissociation. It's not a matter of mere curiosity with no lasting effect, but a serious violation of the child's psychological integrity and future mental health." The clinician concluded that in children, pornography shapes the circuits of desire, arousal, and relationships before the development of solid emotional and educational reference points. The psychologist also emphasized the learning of violence, since around 50% of mainstream pornography involve physical or verbal violence against women who react in a neutral or positive manner. Children therefore learn that violence can be associated with pleasure, that fear can coexist with arousal, and that disgust can be desirable. This leads to confusion and a trivialization of violent practices, which can have dramatic consequences. In France, it's known that 1 in 2 rapes of a minor is committed by another minor. Even more disturbing, a recent study in Finland indicates that children exposed to pornography at a very early age are more likely to seek out illegal child pornography later in life. The survey carried out by the Protect the Children Association indicates that by the age of 18, 57% of respondents actively searched the internet for child sexual abuse material. The accumulation of harm demonstrates just how necessary this legislation is. The Committee on Constitutional and Legal Affairs also focused on the mechanisms proposed by the bill. We adopted 9 amendments that further strengthen and clarify S-209. It's therefore a successful example of teamwork and clearly demonstrates the importance of a second careful review in the Senate chamber, in this case, a third review. The First Amendment, easiest to explain, provides a clear definition of what constitutes pornographic material, a concept at the heart of S-209. We set aside the Criminal Code definition, which was somewhat outdated, and, according to some, its scope was too broad. This was set aside in favor of a more realistic and concrete alternative. Such materials must show genital or anal regions of a person engaging in or depicted as engaging in explicit sexual activity for the purpose of arousing sexual excitement. There's no longer any question here of classifying bare breasts as pornographic material or worrying that mere images of nudity might be targeted. I remind you that from the outset, my bill has provided an exception for pornographic material with a legitimate purpose related to science, medicine, education, and art. An administrative regime of financial penalties has been added to the bill, consisting of fines for pornographic platforms that fail to comply with the law. That is to say, those that don't verify or estimate the age of their clients before granting them access to the site. This regime and the amount of fines will be defined by the regulatory phase. It's in addition to a penalty already provided for in the bill, namely that offenders will have access to their site blocked in Canada. These sanctions are similar to those in place in other countries in this respect. I took into account criticism regarding the potentially overbroad scope of S-209 by proposing 3 amendments which passed. A question was raised. Did the bill target only pornography platforms or also social media platforms such as X, which distribute a great deal of pornography consumed by minors? Once again, we're leaving the government some leeway at the regulatory stage to decide what's covered and what isn't. Under Section 12, the Governor and Council may exclude certain pornography distributors from the application of the Act. This amendment seemed all the more relevant given that the government is due to present a new version of the Online Harms Bill, which we heard about earlier. It will have an impact on content unsuitable for children on social media. It therefore needs some leeway. Ultimately, we're leaving it to the government to decide when the bill comes into force rather than prescribing a time frame of several years, as nothing is straightforward in Internet legislation. Lord James Bethell of the House of Lords explained to the committee that it took the UK 2.5 years to fine-tune regulations with pornographic platforms and web giants.
Concerns that users' anonymity might not be respected during age verification or estimation. The Privacy Commissioner, Philippe Dufresne, who has been critical in the past, has this time expressed satisfaction with the amendments, which ensure stronger privacy protection in the latest version of the bill. In particular, Section 12 has been strengthened to require the government to take into account a set of stricter criteria, including limiting the collection of personal information to what is strictly necessary and selecting a highly effective method for conducting age verification or estimation. The methods will be chosen at the regulatory stage as technology is evolving quickly. The more time goes by, the more I'm convinced that we need legislation to protect children from exposure to porn. What reinforces my conviction is that several countries and several U.S. states have taken decisive action, and there has been no reports of data breaches or privacy violation of porn users, contrary to the prediction of those opposed to any form of regulation. Australia is leading the way. 3 months after banning those under 16 from accessing social media, the Australian authorities have since March 8th required Internet users to prove they are 18 years old to access pornographic content, adult video games, sexually explicit chatbots, or anything that encourages suicide or eating disorders. Offenders face fines of 50 million Australian dollars. The E-Safety Commissioner of Australia appeared before our committee to describe what I would consider a real turning point. I quote, Australia will require the search engines to blur explicit violence, like the videos, but also pornography, so that kids cannot come across it incidentally, accidentally, and in your face. Our research has shown that almost 30% of Australian kids under the age of 13, usually around the age of 9 and 10, Australian kids under the age of 13, usually around the age of 9 and 10, that they are not deliberately seeking out pornography, but come across this by using a simple search engine or playing games. And they describe this as being accidental, unsolicited, and in your face. France, Germany, and the United Kingdom have introduced legislation. Lord Bethel of the House of Lords reassured our committee, and I quote him, "We've heard libertarian arguments that age verification threatens privacy. In practice, it hasn't. The UK has adopted privacy-preserving age estimation technologies such as facial analysis and document checks, but it is shown that they do not store personal data. These systems are already being used in banking, gambling, and alcohol sales. The goal is not perfection, it's harm reduction. The UK example shows this is achievable. That's why I urge Canada," he says, "to act now. Delay only prolongs the arms of children." Things are also happening on the European Union side. Adult content platforms such as Pornhub, StripChat, XNXX, and Xvideos have been charged with breaching European Union rules by letting children access pornographic content on their sites. It could lead to hefty fines, as much as 6% of their global annual turnover. The tide is turning, and states are demanding accountability. Child protection is now at the forefront, and that is reassuring. But what is Canada doing? We are failing seriously behind, and there are still no concrete measures in place to protect Canadian children online. Heritage Minister Mark Miller is expected to introduce a new version of his online harm bills, as the previous version, Bill C-63, has died on the order paper. But Bill C-63 did not include any explicit requirement for porn sites to verify the age of their users. I hope the new version will be more comprehensive and precise, because the psychological well-being of our children is at stake. Tout à l'heure, en écoutant le...
Earlier, listening to Minister Solomon, I felt some hope. He spoke, believe it or not, about age verification. That's progress. Since I started defending the necessity of protecting children, never has a Liberal minister ever said those words, age verification. So who knows? Maybe we will make some progress. To conclude, in the absence of any assurance from the government, I continue to champion this bill and to speak up and clearly on this issue. So I urge you colleagues to vote in favor of S-209 at third reading so that it can proceed to the House of Commons. Thank you.